Online learning is not the next big thing. It is the now big thing. A very good afternoon to everyone present here. I am Riddhi Jindal, the moderator for today's session, organized by Law Internships. Law Internships started with the objective of providing first-hand experience of the day-to-day functioning of the various legal bodies through legal internships to students pursuing undergraduate or postgraduate program in law by Mr. Shubham Solanki sir, co-founder and partner, and Ms. Amrita Chan ma'am, partner at Law Internships. We have amongst us Mr. Amir Bhavani sir, principal associate at Dheer and Dheer Associates. Sir is postgraduate in MBA from ICFAI University and completed his LLB as well as LLM from Osmania University. His core expertise lies in dispute resolution, especially involving Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, banking laws, and general corporate. Sir regularly appears before various judicial, quasi-judicial authorities, including High Courts, Debts Recovery Tribunal, and National Company Law Tribunal. He advises significant number of companies, creditors, other stakeholders to identify and adopt the most suitable approach to deal with the complex web of possible outcomes and legal strategies to effectively deal with the aspects of corporate insolvency and restructuring process. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Brief topics to be covered in today's lecture are framework of IBC, role of Committee of Creditors, duties of IRP-RP, concept of moratorium, mandatory contents of a resolution plan, waterfall mechanism for distribution of proceeds. Before we begin with this,
that Sachin Pilot was part of a conspiracy to bring down his government with the BJP. I think the lies were formed.
Yes, Riddhi, you go ahead.
Okay. Before we begin with this session, I would like to give you a few instructions. It is going to be an interactive session. In case of any questions, either write your question in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask your query. I also request everybody to mute their mics and turn on their videos. Without delaying any further, let's begin with the session for today. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Riddhi, for this kind introduction. As you said, we'll try and keep this one as interactive as it's possible, but we also have our own constraints. So what I would suggest is if the participants can give up their questions over there, and once I am done with one topic, maybe questions related to that topic we can take up, and then we can move forward. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So the introduction of the code, IBC. So first, let us understand what is insolvency and bankruptcy. So the insolvency is the inability to pay debts when they are due, right? And with the bankruptcy is when a legal declaration of one's inability to pay the debts is given by a competent authority, that is court. So in insolvency, when if it's not treated well, will lead into bankruptcy. The first topic which I'm going to cover today is the framework of IBC. So the emergence of the code. So Banking Law Reforms Committee formed by the Government of India in August 2014 under the chairmanship of Mr. T.K. Vishwanathan, the former Secretary General, Lok Sabha and former Union Law Minister, Union Law Secretary, submitted the final report on 5th November to the Government of India. And along with that report, he submitted the draft Insolvency and Bankruptcy Bill. And the said bill got the presidential assent on 28th of May 2016, and after the same was passed by both the houses of the parliament. So what's the purpose of the code? The code has consolidated all the laws which were scattered for the insolvency and bankruptcy regime, which are for the companies, the limited liability entities, unlimited liability partnerships, individuals, which were scattered all over. And it has been consolidated by this. So by the code, the effect of repealing of the Presidential Townships Insolvency Act has come into force. The Provincial Insolvency Act 1920 and the SICA, Sikh Industrial Companies Act, has subsequently been altered. And the regime for the revival and the rehabilitation and the liquidation of distressed companies has started. So earlier, it was never a creditor-driven regime. It was always a debtor-driven regime. So that was the whole idea behind IBC. Also, if you see in this under SICA, Sikh Industrial Companies Act, the moratorium which was given when the petition was admitted, it was not time bound. So over here, the IBC has promulgated with a time bound mechanism, which is 180 days, extendable up to 330 days. How this happens, we'll see in the later part of the BPT. So now I have been told by law internships that my audience today would comprise of law students who may or may not be knowing IBC, as well as some practicing advocates. So I have this PPT prepared, which will have both the aspects kept in mind, that I may be catering some aspects to the law students, some to the people who must be already knowing the IBC, and then we'll also sometimes move on to the advanced version wherein the practicing advocates can also learn from this. So who are the internal regulators of the code? So after this IBC code was enacted, IBBI as a regulator came into force. So the code provides for establishment of IBBI, which oversights the insolvency professionals, insolvency professional entities, insolvency professional agencies, and IUs, information utilities. So who are the adjudicating authorities? So over here, IBC has clearly demarcated two things, DRT as well as NCLT. DRT under section 179 and NCLT under section 60. And the appeal from the respective forum lies before DR80 and NCL80, which is section 181 and section 61 respectively. So IBC has created a new class of professionals, as I told earlier, insolvency professionals, which is under 206 section. So IPs are to conduct and run the entire insolvency process under the supervision of NCLT and the guidance of Committee of Creditors. How they run the business or an entity will look later part of the PPT. And they are regulated by IBBI. And IBBI has also given and license for insolvency professional agencies, which will develop these professional standards of the insolvency professionals. And IBBI, of course, would oversight them. So setting up of insolvency information utilities, IUs. So as of now, we just have one IU, that is NESL, National E-Governance Services Limited. The objective is to accept, store, and make readily available authenticated financial information submitted by the creditors. So it gives you some kind of an authenticity. How it will come into picture, we'll look at the later part. So now let us understand the basic structure of the IBC. So how many parts it has and how many schedule it has. So there's one part one which is preliminary. Part two deals with the insolvency resolution and liquidation for corporate persons, that is companies. Part three, which is insolvency resolution and bankruptcy for individuals and partnership firms. Part 4 is the regulation of insolvency professionals, agencies, and IUs. And part 5 is miscellaneous. There have been 12 schedules, which are nothing but the amendments to different legislations. Basic structure of the part 2 of the code. So in the part 2, which is insolvency resolution and liquidation for corporate persons, there are these many chapters, which I don't want to go each one, everyone. You can obviously go through the PPT, which is being shown. So which covers the CIRP process, the liquidation process, fast track, voluntary liquidation, adjudication of the corporate persons, and offenses and penalties. Now, how does this work? How does corporate insolvency resolution process works? So this is the whole chart. So default, if a default occurs, there's a section 4 for that. If that happens, then you can file an application before the adjudicating authority, AA, that is nothing but NCLT, for the corporate persons under section 7, 9, and 10. If the case is admitted, resolution process commences. Then the moratorium is declared under section 14. Public announcement is made by IRP at that time under section 15. Then IRP is also appointed while the moratorium is declared and the petition is admitted by the Honorable NCLT under Section 16. Committee of Creditors is to be constituted by the IRP. How? We'll look into the later part. Section 21 deals with it. Meetings of the Committee of Creditors, Section 22 and 24. How IRP becomes RP or a new person is appointed RP under Section 22. RP to conduct the CIRP and manage the operations of the corporate debtor as a going concern under Section 23. Preparation of information memorandum to seek the prospective buyers. We call it resolution applicants RAs under IBC, that is under Section 29. Submissions of the plan under Section 30. Approval of the plan by the COC under 30 clause 4. The plan which has been approved by the COC would then be approved by AA, that is NCLT under Section 31. Appeal section is 32. Now let us see how this whole works. So who all can file an IBC petition against a company? And what is the threshold amount? That's the minimum amount of default. So earlier when the IBC was introduced, it was 1 lakh. Now it has become 1 crore during this pandemic time of the COVID. Who can file? Financial creditor can file under Section 7. Operational creditor can give a notice under Section 8 and can file under Section 9. And corporate debtor himself or themselves together can file under Section 10 of IBC. Now let us see what is an application of Part 2 under Section 4. So this talks about the minimum threshold or the default level, which was 1 lakh. But as I said, due to financial distress caused by COVID-19, the threshold limit has been increased to rupees 1 crore, via government notification dated 24th of March. Persons who may initiate CIRP. So these are the persons who can initiate CIRP under Section 6. It may be by financial creditor, as I said, operational creditor, and the corporate debtor itself. Financial creditor is defined a person to whom a financial debt is owed, including his assignee. That is Section 5 subclause 7 defines it. Operational creditor means a person to whom a debt incurred in exchange of goods or services, including employment, that is employees, or statutory dues, that is your GST, VAT, income tax, XYZ, is owed, including its assignee. The same includes suppliers' dues, workers' dues, and statutory dues. So now let us see how Section 7 can be invoked by the financial creditor. So financial creditor, either by itself or jointly, can file an application, right? The default for the above purposes includes a default in respect of financial debt owed not only to the applicant financial creditor, but to any other financial creditor of the CD. CD is the corporate debtor. So the said section is suspended for a period of 6 months, extendable up to 1 year in view of the COVID-19 crisis. And a new section has been inserted, Section 10A, which was done through Ordinance number 9 of 2020 with effect from 5/6/2020. So for the financial creditors, where the corporate debtor's financial debt is in the form of securities or deposits, or where the corporate debtor owes a financial debt to a class of creditors exceeding the specified number. So this number, if you're a single creditor, you can file a case. But if you are, for an example, let's say real estate allottee, then there is some threshold that either 10% of the total number of the creditors, or if 100 people can join together, you can file a single application. This is only with relevance to the allottees of real estate project. So that's what it says for the allottees under a real estate project, an application initiating CIRP, that is corporate insolvency resolution process against the corporate debtor, is to be filed jointly by not less than 100 of such allottees or 10% of them, whichever is less. An application under Section 7 is to be accompanied by a default record from an information utility. So earlier, this was not a mandatory thing, but Honorable NCLT, Delhi bench, by its order dated 12/5/2020, made this compulsory. So now if you're filing a case under Section 7, it has to be accompanied by a record of default by the information utility, which is now NESL. And it is not expensive. We are doing it. It's not expensive. It just hardly costs 300 to 500 per document, and the whole report is not so expensive at all. This is just to cater that whatever is filed is authentic. So such an application is to be accompanied by the name of the RP proposed. So over here, this is a mandatory thing. So when you file a section 7, that is a financial creditor file section 7, then it is mandatory for them to name a resolution professional. So we call it as a proposed IRP, right? So that will be amongst the IPs. IPs, we'll talk later who are those IPs and how they become IPs. So the adjudicating authority within 14 days of the receipt of the application ascertains the existence of a default from the record of an information utility on the basis of the evidence given by IO as well as other evidence given or furnished by FCs. Now this 14 days is not mandatory, it's only directory. So an adjudicating authority to admit section 7 has to be satisfied with these of the following things: that a default is there and no disciplinary proceedings are pending against the proposed RP. Failure to fulfilling this criteria results in a rejection of an application. So if, for an example, if there is some kind of proceedings pending before the RP, then IBBI is put into the picture. IBBI is asked to name an IRP, and within 10 days, they will come up with the name of the RP. So if the second condition is not fulfilled, your application may not be rejected. But if the first condition is not fulfilled, it will be rejected. That if there is no default and you are just creating a moonshine application, then it may not be admitted. When does CIRP commence? CIRP commences from the date of admission of the application. So the adjudicating authority is to communicate the order of the admission of the application to the FC, to the CD, and then IRP is to take over. Now there was one Supreme Court judgment, a remarkable judgment under section 7, that who has the locus standi. So an appeal was filed before Honorable NCL 80 in this matter. So Supreme Court clarified that once the application has been admitted and IRP has stepped into the shoes of the corporate debtor, that is the board, then they don't have a locus standi. It's only the resolution professional, that is IRP, who has the locus standi. Second point which was discussed in this matter, that IBC is a central law and shall prevail over all the other state laws. So over here there was a question which was in conflict with IBC, and that question arose from Maharashtra Relief Undertaking Special Provisions Act. So Supreme Court stated nothing doing, IBC is paramount, and it will be upheld. So now let us see, we have seen by the financial creditor, now let us see what happens, how an operational creditor can file a case. That is, they have to give a notice under section 8, a demand notice of unpaid operational debt, or a copy of an invoice demanding payment of the amount involved in the default. The corporate debtor shall within 10 days of the receipt of the demand notice or the copy of the invoice bring to the notice of the operational creditor following: first, that there exists a dispute, or else we have paid that amount, and share the receipt. So if the operational creditor receives a notice of dispute from the corporate debtor, and if still he is satisfied that no, I still have a case, or he does not receive any notice of dispute, he can file section 9 after the expiry of such 10 days. So the applicant operational creditor may propose a resolution professional. So if you see under section 7, it was mandatory. Over here, it is only a choice given to the operational creditor to name someone. So there was one such scenario in the initial stages of IBC, wherein a question arose that when and where can a dispute be raised, and when it will be declared as an existing dispute. So that's first. And second thing which arose was under section 9 subclause 3 subclause C, is that a mandatory requirement that they should have a certificate from a financial institution, that is bank. So Supreme Court stated that it is not mandatory, it is only directory to have it. If for an example you go to a bank, like for an example you go to SBI and tell them to give you a certificate, they might not be ready, because then the onus shifts to them. So they may not be always ready to give you a certificate stating that you have not received so and so amount from your debtor. So Supreme Court stated if there's a hardship, there is no mandatory requirement for that. And then it was obviously amended by the second amendment dated 17/8, right? Now this section is also been suspended. So any default arising on or after 25th of March, that is the day of the lockdown, for a period of 6 months, this has been suspended. So any default after that date, you cannot file. So what does an operational creditor have to furnish along with the application? So a copy of the invoice demanding the payment, an affidavit to that effect that no notice is given by the corporate debtor, that is a notice of dispute, a copy of the certificate from the financial institutions maintaining the records. If you are unable to give it, it is always prudent to give at least the bank statement so that you can show your bona fides. A copy of any record with the information utility that there is no payment of unpaid debt, and any other proof confirming that there is no payment of unpaid debt from any other prescribed institutions, or any other evidence which you can bring. Same happens here. NCLT has 14 days of time within which they'll admit. When will they admit? If the application is complete, there is no payment of the unpaid debt, the invoice or the notice, that is section 8 notice, has been delivered to the corporate debtor by the operational creditor. No dispute notice has been received from the other side, that is the corporate debtor. There is no record of dispute from the information utility, and there are no disciplinary proceedings pending against the IRP if you have suggested one. If you haven't, there's no question of this. CIRP obviously commences from the date of admission of the application. And if there are any lacunas in your application, Honorable NCLT or the adjudicating authority is bound to give you 7 days of time to clear those defects. Now, as I told you, Mobilox versus Kirusa. So this was the case I was referring, that when does the question of an existing dispute arise and how do you ascertain? So in this judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court has given a plausible contention test. So if you see the lower paragraphs of the PPT, question to be seen by the adjudicating authority while examining the application under section 9, right? So whether there is an operational debt or not, which was 1 lakh, now which has become 1 crore, whether there are documentary evidence provided which shows that debt is due and payable, has not been paid, whether there is an existence of a dispute between the concerned parties, or any record pendency of the suit or arbitration filed before the receipt of demand notice. So if there is a dispute which was there, it may not be a case, or it may not be an arbitration or a civil dispute. It can be a simple piece of paper or a small email. But this has to be before you receive a demand notice. So I'm talking on behalf of a corporate debtor that I receive a demand notice under section 8. It has to be before that and not afterwards. The application shall be accompanied with information relating to the books of accounts and information relating to the resolution proposed, appointed, and a special resolution passed. So this, when we are talking about section 10. So this was the slide I was showing you, but I think I skipped one, so I'll go back. So what happens when a section 10 is filed? So who can file? First of all, let's see who can file section 10. A corporate debtor can file a section 10. An individual from a corporate debtor on behalf of a corporate debtor can file section 10. like wherein a CD has committed a default, a corporate applicant thereof may file an application for initiation of CIRP. Right? This is section 10. Now over here, this has to be with the permission of the board of directors, obviously with 3/4 of the board of directors. But at the moment, this section has also been suspended for a period of 6 months. So what has to be accompanied? So it has to be accompanied by information relating to the books of accounts and such other documents of the specified period. Information relating to the resolution proposed to be appointed as IRP, and a special resolution, that is what I told you, 3/4 of the total number of partners of the CD. Over here, the same thing, 14 days period time is given, 7 days time period is given for you to clear the defects, and CIRP commences from the date of application. So if you're a corporate debtor and if you see that I am unable to run the show, you can have a meeting of directors, can pass a resolution, given authority to X person, that X person becomes a resolution, that becomes a corporate applicant, can file on behalf of the corporate debtor. Now let's see the admission rejection of applications, right? So there's one question I would like to take, which is what are the warning indications of insolvency? It's a very interesting question. The warning indications of insolvency is you are unable to pay your debts on time. That's first. Second, your management is not on the same page. Third, the market looks grim. Fourth, your suppliers are not supporting. Like right now, if your suppliers are supporting you and helping you that, okay, because it's COVID, you don't pay now, you may pay it in the month of September, October, November, December. So that's a good sign. But no, if they say, no, we may go for an action, or no, you are supposed to pay. So that's a warning indication for the insolvency. Yeah, so let's continue. So admission and rejection of an application for initiation of CIRP, section 7, 9, and 10. So within 14 days of receipt of application of CIRP, AA to take a decision about its admission. So AA shall admit an application by FC if the default is occurred, application is complete, no disciplinary proceedings against the proposed RP. For OC, they also have to see that no repayment has been done and there is no pending dispute. So AA shall admit the application by corporate applicant if the application is complete. That is section 10. So if an application is filed by FC, OC, or CD itself is not admitted and is rejected, the AA shall before doing so give a notice of applicant to reply to rectify the defects. As I told you, they gives 7 days of time. CIRP shall commence from the date of the admission of the application. And as I told you, section 7 subclause 5, 9 subclause 5, and 10 subclause 4, which is the pending proceedings against the RP or the IRP proposed, which is held that is only directory and procedural in nature, and it is not mandatory. So as I told you earlier, that you just have to comply with one, not both. Yeah, so what is a creditor's voluntary liquidation? Sir, this kind of questions we will take at the end of the session, because then it will break the whole chain. So non-applicants, who cannot file? So we are just at section 11 and I'm getting a request of subsequent section. So obviously I'll address to it, but at a later point. So non-applicants, persons not entitled to make application. So who cannot make? We have seen who can make. Now let us see who cannot. So a corporate debtor undergoing a CIRP, a corporate debtor having completed CIRP 12 months preceding the date of making of an application, CD or FC who has violated any of the resolution plan terms, which was approved 12 months before this date, CD in respect of whom already a liquidation order has been passed, right? Now, time limit for completion of CIRP. So, what's the time limit? CIRP shall be completed within a period of 180 days from the date of admission of the application to initiate the same. Insolvency resolution process period is defined under section 5 subclause 14. So, if it goes beyond 180 days, RP has to take the approval of the COC, which has to be there by a voting percentage of more than 66%, and then an application has to be filed, which can be extended for further 90 days of period, but this can only be done once, and CIRP process shall mandatory be completed. So even if it's given 270, they still have a time to get completed in 330 days. But just because of time, we don't want the company to be liquidated. We still give them a time. And then there was an amendment which was dated 5/8/2019, which came into effect from 16/8/2019, which stated that there's a mandatory requirement for this to be completed within 330 days. This was taken up by Honorable Supreme Court, which has struck down the word mandatory, because for this kind of a case, which in this case it was Essar Steel, it may not be possible for you to complete the whole process within 330 days. So Supreme Court stated mandatory has to be eliminated. You should try it to be completed within 330 days. Then all the NCLTs are empowered to take their own decisions accordingly. So if an application is filed, can you withdraw it? Yes, you can withdraw it under section 12A. So the adjudicating authority may allow the withdrawal of the application, which is as per regulation 30A, and form FA has to be filed by the IRP, and he has to file an application for such withdrawal. And in the matter of Brilliant Alloys versus S. Rajgopal, Honorable Supreme Court held that insolvency proceedings can be withdrawn even after the invitation of resolution plan. So there was this question, at what stage it can be withdrawn? So Supreme Court stated it can even be withdrawn when the resolution plan was invited. So at that belated stage, it can be withdrawn. So declaration of moratorium, this happens under section 13. So when the application is admitted under section 9, 10 or 7 by the FC, they Honorable Adjudicating Authority would declare a moratorium, which is under section 14, and IRP has to cause a public announcement, which is under section 15, and IRP is obviously appointed under section 16. Public announcement of this has to be made immediately, and that immediately is not later than 3 days from the date of his appointment. So I think I've covered the first part, and Riddhi, I think we can take few questions now.
Yes, sir. There's a query from Abhishek Castro. His query is the recent implications of ordinance by Government of India to suspend the provisions of IBC due to COVID-19 crisis. In such case, no action can be initiated against defaulters. In such case, whether the operational creditors and lenders can approach ADR to recover debts.
ADRs, that's alternative dispute resolutions, right? So ADR was already there, is there, and will always be there. Forget about ADR. You can go to, if you are an FC, you can go to DRT. If you are FC or OC, you can go to civil court. You can obviously, if you have a arbitration clause or an arbitration agreement, yes, you can approach ADR for the recovery of debts. There is no question on that. Any other questions?
Another question is, what is a voluntary agreement?
There is no voluntary agreement. There's a voluntary appearance. So What are the exceptions to the moratorium? So exceptions are all the essential commodities and services like electricity, water, telecommunication services, IT services. Everything has to be excluded from the moratorium. These things have to be continued. So the supply of goods and services critical to the protection and preservation of the value of the corporate data and to manage the operations of corporate data as deemed by IRP will not be terminated. So COC would decide along with IRP that these services are essential in nature, these are to be continued, and those things would not be covered under Section 14 moratorium. The moratorium shall not apply to such transactions as may be specified by the central government in consultations with various stakeholders. And moratorium will be in force till the completion of CIRP. However, where at any time during the CIRP period, if the Honorable Adjudicating Authority approves the plan or passes an order of liquidation, that moratorium ceases to exist. So as I said, any license, permit, registration, quota, concession, clearance, everything is continued. In the case of Deccan Chronicle, NCL 80 in 2017 held that moratorium will not affect any proceedings initiated or pending before the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution or where an order is passed under Article 136 of the Constitution and the powers of High Court. So herein they are trying to say that any SLPs, special leave petitions, any writ petitions under 32 and 226 before Supreme Court and High Court respectively are not covered under the moratorium. They can go on, and that is why they are known as writ petitions. So I'm done with the moratorium part, and I think we have a few more questions.
No, sir, there is no query, but I have a query. Shall I, sir?
Yeah, please.
So, can bankers invoke personal guarantee in relation to company which are undergoing CIRP during moratorium period?
No, you come again. Personal guarantee?
Can bankers invoke personal guarantee in relation to company which are undergoing CIRP during moratorium?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, moratorium only applies to the corporate debtor and not to the corporate guarantors or the personal guarantors. So the guarantors are kept separately. So your question is, can you move against the corporate guarantor or a personal guarantor who has given a guarantee for this particular corporate debtor who is undergoing CIRP? Yes, you can do it very well. You can do it because that will be a separate proceedings against a guarantor that has nothing to do with the corporate debtor.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Right. Shall I continue?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now let us see what are the role and duties of IRP and RP, Interim Resolution Professional and Resolution Professional. So insolvency professional. So insolvency professional means a person enrolled under Section 206 with an insolvency professional agency as its member and registered with board as an insolvency professional under Section 207. So IPs get an opportunity to play three categories under the code. So they can be appointed as IRPs, they'll be appointed as RPs, and they'll be appointed as liquidators. Right? Who can become an IP? What are the eligibility criteria for that? So it should not be a minor, should be a resident of India, fulfills the qualification and experience specified in Regulation 5 or 9, has not been convicted as by any competent court of for an offence punishable with imprisonment for a term exceeding 6 months, or for an offence involving moral turpitude in a period of 5 years, has not elapsed from the date of such sentence, has not been convicted of offence and sentenced for imprisonment for a period of 7 years or more, is not an undischarged insolvent, has not been declared to be of unsound mind, and is a fit and a proper person, right, considering his integrity and other reputation and character. So he has passed the limited insolvency examination within 12 months before the date of his application for enrollment with the agency, has completed the required pre-registration education course, has completed the board approval national insolvency program, completed board approval graduate insolvency program, Now, who can become? If you have these qualities and if you are able to crack the exam, can I become or can you become? So there's a criteria for that. So he or she, if is from the management background, then should have at least 15 years of experience. But if he's a professional who's a chartered accountant or a cost accountant, an advocate or a company secretary, then he or she should have 10 years of experience. Then only they are eligible to even write the exam. So registration for a limited period. So notwithstanding any of the provisions of Regulation 5, an individual is eligible to be registered for a limited period for an insolvency professional, or if or she has been in practice for 15 years. So if that's 10 years, you write an exam. Before an exam, you can become, but you should have 15 years of experience. And you have to have submit an application for registration in Form A of secure schedule of these regulations. So for him or her to be appointed as IRP or RP, what are the criteria? So he or she has to be independent to the corporate data. Now, these are the criteria because he or she would be stepping into the shoes of the board of directors of the company. So he or she should be competent enough. Then he or she should also be independent. And while considering the independence of this CD, these are the checks and balances, that he is eligible to be appointed as an independent director, is not a related party to the CD, is not an employer or the proprietor of a partner, and those are the criteria. So code of conduct, there are regulations which talks about their integrity and objectivity and their independence and impartiality. You can just go through it. This is very formal. This is just akin to a person who can become an independent director under the Companies Act. It's the same here. So he should possess all these things. Obviously, he should be having professional competence. He should adhere to the timelines, information management. All these things are required. So what is the appointment and the tenure of IRP? So adjudicating authority shall appoint IRP on the insolvency commencement date itself. So when an application is admitted, IRP is appointed. Where the application of CIRP is made by FC or OC or the CD or the resolution professional as proposed in the application shall be appointed as IRP if no disciplinary proceedings are pending against that person. When I write him, it's all him inclusive of her. Where application for CIRP is made by an operational creditor and no proposal for the IRP is made, the AA shall make a reference to IBBI and within 10 days IBBI has to revert. If they don't revert in 10 days, it is a deemed approval. And term of IRP shall continue till the date of appointment of resolution professionals. So we have seen this, that IRP terms end at 30 days. When RP is appointed maybe 45th day because of this 10 days period, because of the approval of the Honorable NCLT. So the amendment has been carried out, which states that he shall continue, he shall
There's a technical glitch. Sir will be joining us in a minute. Sir is joining us in a minute. Kindly bear with it.
Hello. I guess my Zoom is disconnected. I've just logged in from my phone. Just give me a minute.
Yes. Sure, sir.
And these are the advantages and disadvantages of technology. Is there any question I can answer while this gets connected?
Yes, sir. There's a question from Abhishek Bansal. Shall I?
Yeah, please.
Where upon initiation of CIRP, NCLT reverses the judgment of NCLT. Who shall bear the expenses incurred by IRP for the work that has been done?
So for those expenses, obviously the creditors would first bear the expenses, but that has to be borne from the pocket of corporate debtor itself. So corporate debtor, so it's a chain. So first it will be the creditors who will be paying out to the IRP for its expenses, and those expenses would in turn have to be reimbursed, or maybe a claim has to be filed before the corporate debtor for the same. Because it was corporate debtor because of whom this whole process started. So that corporate debtor is to be blamed for the same.
Okay, sir.
Any other question?
No, sir, there's no other question.
Facing some issues, I don't know. Just saying connecting, but I'm unable to connect. Just big shift again.
Yes, sir. Abhishek, are you clear with your question? Or you have any other query to ask, sir? I think he's very well clear with this question.
Okay. I think I'm back.
You're able to hear me, right?
Yes, sir, I'm able to hear you, and even I'm able to see you.
Let me see. Just because I need to switch off the other device now.
So your voice is echoing.
Yeah, because my other device is on.
Okay, sir.
Now it must be good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So first, I think Abhishek stated no, and then it's very clear. So
Yes, sir, he's very well clear with your answer, sir.
no, but I mean, I don't mind if it's okay. Now it is good to hear. No, but if he has a further question, I can still answer.
No, sir, there's no further questions till now.
Okay. No, I'm talking about Abhishek because I had one no. Let us not proceed with any no's. Is it on?
No, sir. Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry for this disruption, guys. Pardon me for that. But that is why the other device, so we can utilize that time.
Yes, sir.
Because of the rain, it happens. So I have two internet connections, so I keep on switching.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's continue. So public announcement has to be done within 3 days of time. And IRP bears the expenses of the public announcement, which may be reimbursed by the committee of to the extent it is ratified. So over here the same, IRP bears, committee then COC, that's committee, that's the financial creditors. They will pay this IRP, from where they will get, either they have some person who will be paying them when the company is revived, or the company goes into liquidation and they can recover. So at the end of the day, it is always the money of the corporate debtor. You always enjoy the money of the corporate debtor, but for the time being, you have to shell it out. Yeah, so the public announcement is to be in the form of Form A of the schedule. The announcement is to be published in one English and one regional language newspaper with wide circulation. And if the IRP feels or the COC feels, because at this moment I would say only IRP, but later point is also COC for the other communications and announcements in the public. And if they feel that this corporate data has significant presence, let's say Deccan Chronicle for an example, because we are just going through the Deccan Chronicle matter. So Deccan Chronicle, we know that it's famous in Hyderabad, but now it's also famous in Andhra. So you are supposed to give a public announcement in Andhra as well. So if you can give one in Andhra Jyoti, and it may cover both the parts, or you can have one local newspaper there as well. It is also to be publicized in the website of the corporate data and the IBBI website as well. So the announcement should state where the claim forms have to be downloaded or to be obtained from. And it also offers choice of 3 insolvency professionals identified by Regulation 4A to act as authorized representatives, and provide the last day for the date of submission of the proofs, which is 14 days from the appointment of IRP. So basically he calls on all the claims that this company is going under CIRP, whomsoever has claims, be it a financial creditor or an operational creditor, government dues, or employees or workmen. Anything and everything is invited, and then he would collate. So the announcement should contain the following information: name and address of the CD and the CIRP, name of the authority, last date for the submission of the claims, details of this person who's giving the announcement, IRP, with the management of the CD, and penalties for any misleading claims, and the date of the close date of CIRP, which as of now would be considered as 188th day. Now what happens to the management of the affairs of the corporate data? So it has been taken care by IRP now, that is under section 70. So from the date of appointment of IRP, the management of the affairs of the corporate data shall vest in the IRP. So the powers of the board of directors or partners of the corporate data shall stand suspended and be exercised by IRP. So it's just like board is suspended, IRP becomes the board now. And all the officers and the management of the corporate data shall report to IRP, and they should extend all the cooperation to the IRP. And financial institutions like banks and everything, so even the signatories is changed. So the MD or the authorized signatory would become now the IRP, and he can only sign the balance sheets, the checks, everything. So acts and the IRP acts and executes in the name and style of the corporate data, because now he's in the shoes of the board of directors. He has all the authority to access the electronic records of the corporate data from the IU and from other financial institutions, and has the authority to access all the books of accounts for this purpose. What are the duties of IRP? Now over here the simple logic is, if you are a board of director of a company, how would you run the show? Those are your powers. What are your duties over there as a board of director? This becomes the duties of the IRP. But let us go through it very quickly. So he has to collect all the information relating to the corporate data for determining the financial positions, including the information related to what are the business operations of last 2 years, financial and operational payments for the last 2 years, list of all the assets and liabilities, right? Then he receives and collates all the claims submitted by the creditors, constitute a committee of creditors. So now this committee of creditors would only be the financial creditors, not the government dues, not the employees, not the suppliers. That is to say, only the FCs, not the OCs. Then he monitors the assets of the corporate data and manages operations, and take control of all the assets into his own custody. Now let us see, like for an example, if I run a show, I have a company, my company is undergoing now CIRP. In 3 days the announcement is done. Will I like if some X person comes into my office and says me to leave the office because now I'm not anymore a board of director? I would not like. I am not going to cooperate with this person. What happens? You have a recourse. Section 90. So the personnel of the CD, its promoters, or any of its other persons associated of the management shall extend all the assistance and cooperation to the IRP as may be required by him in managing the affairs of the corporate data. In case any personnel do not cooperate, IRP can file an application under section 19, and then NCLT would direct them to cooperate. And if they don't, then there becomes a contempt of court, then the whole criminal proceedings would commence. Now, this is very important, that IRP should manage, or even the RP should manage the corporate data as a going concern. So before going to all these things which may not be so interesting, I'll share something interesting. But I was doing a case of a hospital. Corporate data was a hospital. Then CIRP started. IRP said, I don't have a single rupee. So moratorium, now over here I'll make you understand two vital concepts. The concept of going concern and the exceptions of moratorium. Now you can correlate over here. So IRP stated, I don't have money. Employees file an application that financial creditors, that is now the COC, has to have some kind of interim finance right now, because hospital is lacking all the basic facilities. There are no saline bottles. There's no worker who's working there. There are no nurses. Doctors are not being paid since last 3 months. There is no drug or supply of all the medicines. So to keep the hospital as a going concern, those essential commodities have to be kept out of the moratorium. Finance has to be raised. 66% of the COC has to agree. They have to ask RP to raise the finance and run the show. Now, why they should do it? I'll tell you two things. One is, if another hospital is interested in taking over this hospital which is sick, they would only do it when the hospital is in the running condition. Like what happened in Vizag recently, that the plant was locked. Suddenly they opened after 3 months, leakage started, people lost their lives. This hazard can also happen in hospital, that's first. Some equipments, like for an example, say some machineries, like say a casting unit, which cast irons is manufactured. If that is kept idle, for 1 month you just have to repair it. You cannot start the operations immediately. So no one would be interested, that's first. For example, let's see if no one is interested at all. But when it goes to liquidation, will it fetch a good price? No, it will only fetch a scrap value. It would not fetch you a going value. So for all these practical purposes, it is always advisable that IRP and RP to manage the corporate data as a going concern. Now we'll go into all these things. So for the above purposes, IRP shall have the authority to appoint accountants, legal representatives, professionals, having to enter into contracts.
Your voice is getting interrupted due to technical issues.
Okay. So from when it was, then I can go back and start again. So from when it was interrupting, is it good now?
Yes, it's good, sir.
It's good. Okay. But from when it was interrupting, then I can go back and maybe I can. Should I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You can always break me in between if this kind of technical thing happens. Yeah, so I'll just continue. So I was just telling you that example, and then now let us come back here. That for the purpose, the IRP shall have all these following authorities. So you just have to simply think that what if a company is running by the authority from the house of the board of directors, the same way it has to run under the authority of IRP or RP. So appointment of RP. So right now or till now we have just understood what happens with the IRP. Now let us understand what happens with RP. So section 22. So the first meeting of COC shall be held within the 7 days of its constitution. So in the first meeting, COC shall by majority and not less than 66%, either they'll have to resolve to continue this person as RP or have to appoint a fresh RP. And when this is done, an application is filed under section 22(3), wherein a new RP has to give his consent under form AA, and this, if there is no disciplinary proceedings pending against the said person, that person would be appointed as RP. So now IRP is so qualified, he can do everything. He is independent. But can he do by himself? No. He has to work under the authority of COC. Major of the decisions of COC are to be approved by 66% of COC. What is COC? The constituent committee which is formed by only the financial creditor of a corporate debtor. So resolution professional to conduct the CIRP. So RP shall conduct the entire CIRP and manage the operations, as I already stated. RP shall exercise powers and perform duties as are vested or conferred on IRP. So it's all same. Whatever there for IRP, same becomes for RP. And in case of replacement of IRP, he shall provide all the information documents to the RP. This I've already told you. So what is the role of RP? He has to conduct the whole CIRP in compliance with the procedure under the code and regulations. He can exercise the powers of board of directors of the corporate debtor. He manages the operations of the corporate debtor as a going concern, protects it from all the aspects, and acts as an officer of the court. And any hindrance in the working of CIRP will amount to the contempt of court. This was given by NCLT Bombay in the RCIL matter. And role of a resolution professional under IBC is not adjudicative but only administrative. So the role of liquidator is adjudicatory, but the role of resolution professional is only administrative. What are the duties of RP? RP shall have the duty to preserve and protect the assets of corporate debtor, including continued business operations of the corporate debtor. So for the above purpose, RP shall undertake the following: take immediate custody and control of all the assets, represent and act on behalf of CD with third parties, courts, all the proceedings everywhere, can raise interim finance with the approval of the COC, can appoint accountants, maintain an updated list of claims, convene and attend all the meetings. Prepare the information memorandum. So what is information memorandum? The whole information of the corporate debtor, their assets, liabilities, business, everything, which is prepared, which is known as information memorandum. This is shared with only the prospective resolution applicants, or let us say buyers in our own very way, that who are interested in this company. So how would they know that what is in this company? Because IRP or RP, they both have done a tremendous job of collating all the information and putting at one place, which is known as information memorandum. This document becomes the Bible for any person who wants to invest or to take the control of the assets as a going concern, or even at the time of liquidation of the corporate debtor. Then RP invites claims. Then RP invites the resolution plans from the prospective resolution applicants. Then present all the resolution plans before the COC in the meetings. File the applications for avoidance of transaction, which are there in chapter 3, which is PUFE, preferential, undervalued, fraudulent, and extortionate. So all these 4 transactions, and such other actions may be specified by IBBI. So PUFE I already told you. In terms of regulation 35A of CIRP regulations, the resolution professional shall apply to AA for appropriate relief for this preferential transactions. I'm done, and I think a lot of queries are there.
There are 2 queries.
Yeah.
One is from Muskan. She is asking, can a lawyer come insolvency professional represent financial creditor or operational creditor while filing application in the court under section 709 and also act as IRP?
So can do either of it, can't do both. So he or she can be representative of a financial creditor or an operational creditor, yes, but the same person won't be able to become an IRP or RP, because then the independence does not happen. As you stated earlier, those person would pay him the fees. That fees now makes him an connected person.
Okay. And the Another query is from Devika Dev. She is asking, who is required to register under the IRP?
Okay, who is required to register under? I think this question, this question is not proper, but I'll answer from whatever I can understand. So IRP is a person who's qualified, a lawyer, cost accountant, chartered accountant, or a management person with first 10 years or 15 years, and then has given the exam, registered with IBBI. So that person can become IRP. That person actually becomes IP, insolvency professional. Then that person has to be appointed by the Honorable Adjudicating Authority as IRP, and then he can in turn become RP. So first he has to become IP by passing exam, following the criteria. When he becomes IP, he is eligible to be appointed as interim resolution professional, IRP, and once the COC is happy with his work or her work, can be appointed as RP.
Sir, another question from her side only is, what are the different terms regarding weight within IRP?
Regarding weight, I never came across such thing. Do you understand this question? If you can understand, I can also answer. Or maybe we can ask her.
I request Devika Dev, she can unmute herself and ask her query from.
Yeah, I don't know that. Please go ahead.
I again request Devika Dev to unmute herself and ask her query from sir.
Okay, let's proceed. She may ask later as well. We will have our. Yeah, so basically if you have some questions which you want to ask in the later part, all the participants, we will have ample time. I would not be taking so long to get you bored with this PPT. So we will have an interactive part as was promised from the commencement of this session. So I'll just proceed now further. Role of Committee of Cretas. So Committee of Cretas, section 21. So IRP shall, after the collection of the claims received against the corporate debtor and determination of financial positions of the CV, constitutes a COC. Now COC shall comprise all the financial creditors of the corporate debtor except the ones which are related parties. In case of a consortium, each member of the consortium shall be the part of the COC, and the voting share shall be determined on the basis of the debt owed to them. Now, when a person is a financial creditor as well as an operational creditor, he shall be treated as FC and shall have voting power to the extent of the financial debt owed. Now, in case of assignment of operational debt to a financial creditor, the assignee shall be considered as an operational creditor to the extent of such assignment. Right. In case of a consortium arrangement or syndicate facility or debt issued as securities, where the terms provided for a single trustee or agent to act for the financial creditors, each financial creditor may authorize a trustee or it can represent itself in the COC to the extent of its voting share. They can also appoint an IP for their representative purposes. So if a financial debt is in the form of security or deposits and the terms of financial debt provide for appointment of a trustee, then such trustee or agent shall act on behalf of such FC. If it's owed to a class of creditors, the IRP shall make an application to adjudicating authority for appointment of authorized representatives before the first COC meeting. And if it is represented by a guardian, executor, or an administrator, such person shall act as AR of such FC, authorized representative. So all decisions of the COC shall be taken by a vote of not less than 51% of this voting share. Now over here, I'd like to point out, when I say all these are very menial, which are only day-to-day affairs, which are not of high importance. But those which are of high importance, the threshold limit is 66%. Like application under section 12, 22, 27, 28, 31, 33, like liquidation, approval of plan, withdrawal of an application, POFE, avoidance transactions, as I told you. Everything has to be done with 66% of the voting share of the COC. And at any point of time, if COC member requests the IRP to give out the financial information, IRP or RP should have to do it within 7 days. So now over here you see the interplay of the powers of COC and RP. And this is done very nicely in IBC to see that everything is independent. No one person has all the authority, and it becomes unbiased throughout. So constitution of committee of creditors under regulation 17 of the regulations. So IRP is to file a report certifying constitution of COC within 2 days of verification of claims, and within 7 days he should have his first COC meeting, in which his fate obviously would be decided whether he'll continue or is thrown out. So when the appointment of RP is delayed, IRP is to perform the functions which I already told you. I don't want to go there again. So what's the role of COC? So COC is the decision-making body in the CIRP of the corporate data. So if you remember earlier, I told you, now this is a creditor-driven regime. Earlier it was always data-driven regime. So under SICA, if I am unable to run the show, what will happen? I will try and find some buyer. I will try and find a person to invest in my company. That may be delayed. That may get delayed due to various reasons. But over here, because it's a time-bound mechanism, and creditors, that is financial creditors, are given all the authority, and COC becomes the decision maker. This is a very good code, I would say, IBC, to bring out this vital aspect and to address this issue of regime which was earlier driven only by the debtors. And that is why, see, I'll tell you one interesting thing. When IBC came in, everywhere it was like, why it has come up, it will be very bad act, this should not be done, everyone is going to lose their company. So if that was the case, then why, when the Honorable Finance Minister of our country came up with a suspension idea of 6 months, every newspaper, every news channel, they were like, why this step has been taken? So you obviously cannot make all the stakeholders happy. But from the point of view of the country at large, from the point of view of the stakeholders, as we also have our money in the banks, this has been a very good regime. And one very funny thing I say, that every act, every new venture has its own teething problems. But this is an act, IBC, which has gone a long infancy period. So the teething problems are ongoing. And it's been 4 or 5 years and still we are facing the teething problems. Now, let us come back to the role of COC, because now I've made you understand why the role of COC is so important for a company to revive and for the whole IBC regime to be intact. So the objective is to take a business decision by the requisite majority, which will be binding on all the stakeholders of the corporate data. So COC to assess the feasibility and viability of a resolution plan. So if X person files a plan, so that person has to be independent, whether he has money, whether he has other financial backing, does he have a concrete plan where he'll be able to implement the whole thing or not? That is to be ascertained by the COC along with the RP, resolution professional. Each creditor shall vote in accordance with the voting share assigned to it based on the financial debt. RP can submit the resolution plan to AA only after the approval of the COC. Even NCLT cannot take the powers of COC. And once COC decides that yes, this resolution plan is good, NCLT does not have the power to reverse it. So that's what it says. Limited judicial review is permissible in respect of any COC decision. It's only limited only to the facet of very much prudent decisions are to be taken by COC, and wherein And only if there are some technical lacunas, there are some infringement of legal rights, then only judicial intervention is permitted. So the confirmation of IRP as RP or replacement with another RP, that's to be done by COC. They can file an application with AF for replacement of IRP to RP. They can replace the RP as well at any given point of time. They can ratify the expenses of IRP. They can modify the percentage of voting rights, reduction of notice period by holding COC meetings, specifying criteria for prospective RAs. They can have their own very own criteria depending upon the industry and the business and the present position of the corporate debtor. They can fix the expenses and the remuneration of RP. They can have the own evaluation and approval matrix of the resolution plan, and they have to give the reasons for the rejection of it, obviously. Now, after the liquidation of the corporate debtor, the committee of creditors has no role to play, and they have a they are simply a claimant whose matters are to be determined. So over here, I would just want to bring, like, I have done so good appreciation, or I have shown you the importance of the COC, but as soon as liquidation starts, their role ends. And this has been upheld by Honorable NCLAT in Punjab National Bank versus Kiran Shah, who was the liquidator of ORG Informatics. And no provision has been envisaged by now. Over here, the first case of NCLAT is curtailing the right, which is as soon as the liquidation happens. But now I tell you the importance of the COC, that till the liquidation, what power they have. That no provision has been envisaged by the legislature to empower the RP, the NCLT, or the NCLAT to reserve the commercial decision of COC. And this was done by Honorable Supreme Court in a very famous case of K. Shashidhar in 2019. So even there, if a commercial decision is taken by the COC, that cannot be reversed by anyone, not even by NCLAT. Meeting of COC. So all the meetings have to be conducted by the RP. They can be conducted by in-person or electronic means. A notice has to be given. And operational creditors, if they have a threshold of 10% of the debt, they can also be there. And the directors and the partners and one representative of OCs can attend, but they do not have the voting right. And even if they don't attend, the quorum is to be fulfilled. They are not considered while calculating the quorum of the COC. So any creditor who is a member of COC may appoint an RP to represent him. Each member shall have a voting in accordance to the voting share. RP shall determine the voting shares to be assigned, and the meeting of COC shall be conducted in such manner as specified under Chapter 6 of the regulations. The RP may convene a meeting of the COC whenever deemed necessary, or if there's some urgency, 33% of the COC, they can also request the RP to have a meeting. And such a meeting is called by giving a notice of not less than 5 days to every participant by hand delivery or by electronic means. And this notice period may be reduced for emergency purposes, but not like you cannot say that, okay, we want a meeting, let's have it after a couple of hours. You're supposed to give at least 24 hours of time. So notice of the meeting, this is the regulation 21. Notice should inform the participant of the venue, time. This is just like a meeting, simple shareholder meeting. Same thing is provided here. It should provide that a participant may attend through him or a proxy. The notice should contain a list of matters to be discussed. Should also state the process and the manner of voting. Now, very important aspect, replacement of RP by COC. So COC may replace RP at any time during the CIRP. So from IRP to RP, yes, but even if they don't like RP's work, they can still throw him out. I mean, I don't want to use the word throw, but literally it is like that. AA shall forward the name of the proposed RP to IBBI for its confirmation whether disciplinary proceedings are pending. The proposed RP, the existing RP shall continue. So you need approval of COC for these many actions. So RP is the king, but COC has all the power which a king has. So for any interim finance to be raised, for any security interest over the assets of the corporate debtor, for any capital structure, for any record in the change of the ownership, any to give any instructions to the bank maintaining the accounts of the corporate debtor, undertake any related party transactions, amend memorandum of association, articles of association, or delegate his authority to any other person. For this, COC's permission is required, right? For to deposit or permit disposal of the shares, to make any changes in the management, transfer rights, appoint any person. An RP shall convene a meeting of COC and seek the vote of creditors prior taking any of such action. And action taken by RP without the approval, that has to be stated as void. So persons not eligible to be a resolution applicant. Now let's see who all cannot file a resolution plan. Section 29A deals with the whole gamut of things. So a person who's an undischarged insolvent, a person who is a willful defaulter, person who's having management control of the corporate debtor, that is a related party, or is disqualified under the 12th schedule of the Act, or is convicted for any of the moral turpitude or any other things which you were seeing earlier, or is a connected person under any of the definitions. So any connected party, related party, employee, known person, acquaintance, who has any association with the corporate debtor cannot file a resolution plan, cannot become a resolution applicant, and hence he is not eligible for the same. A person who's also been prohibited by SEBI regulations, that person is also not eligible. A person has been a promoter of the same management, no. A person would be disqualified if the above mentioned transaction has taken place. So these transactions are during his term of preferential, undervalued, fraudulent or extraordinary transaction has taken place. Now he is away. But still, because of that transaction, he is not eligible. A person has executed a guarantee in favor of a creditor, or a person is subject to a disabilities given under A to H. So 29A is one good section which has got the whole gamut of checks and balances, wherein if such and such is that, then person cannot become a resolution applicant. So these are all the things. I don't want to repeat everything. These are all. And then there's a clarification given with the holding company and a subsidiary company. And what are the asset reconstruction company can they become? If a bank who has stepped into the shoes of a equity shareholder because of a security interest, can they? Yes, they can, because they are not related. They got this power because of the security interest which they had. Now let's take some questions and let's not bore everyone with so many slides.
Sir, there is one question from Palak. She's asking how to constitute committee of creditors if no claims are received by RP.
So there, I'll tell you, there won't be no, there will be at least one, because if an application is filed by financial creditor or operational creditor, there is one person who will give a claim. So that person will become a COC. So there will be zero. Now, if there is zero, like for an example, section 10. So any good company would not go for section 10. They might only go with a voluntary liquidation. So there won't be zero. You can ask a question that what if there are no financial creditors and only operational creditors? Then yes, they will become the COC according to the threshold limit. So there are checks and balances like 10% of the amount, they'll become one class of OC. And then there are various regulations for that. But there would not be zero. There will be at least one, or it will be more, but not FCs. Then OCs obviously would become the COC. OCs in the sense operational creditors. Any other thing?
No, sir, there's no other question.
You have a doubt?
Yes, so there's another doubt from Palak.
Okay.
Whether a creditor and corporate debtor can reach out for settlement and sought to withdraw CIRP?
Whether creditor and corporate debtor can reach out for settlement and sort. Yeah, so I told you, there's this provision. No, you can withdraw a case, but then if you are withdrawing a case, then you're supposed to have 90% of the COC agreeing with you, because right now, if a case is filed by X bank and you are able to settle with X bank, then Y Bank would also feel worrisome that if you have not settled their debt, you may not even settle my debt. So they have to do it, but they can only do it with 90% of the threshold limit. Yeah. So that's given in 12A. I mean, if she wants to, Palak wants to have a look at, it's section 12A. Yeah. Next question, I think one is from Nafisa. If the CIRP plan is approved by COC, can NCLT reject the CIRP plan? No, not possible. Judicial intervention is very minimal. So if a plan is approved by COC, then that is what I told you, K. Shashidhar judgment, that it cannot be. Judicial intervention is not allowed. I think somewhere here here's the judgment. Second part. So it's not possible. Right, we'll move on.
Yes, sir. I think there are no further questions.
You don't have anything, right? Okay. So what are the essentials of a resolution plan, right? Resolution plan, regulation 37 of CRB regulations. A resolution plan is to provide for measures as necessary for insolvency resolution of a CD to maximize the value of the assets. Now over here, you just have to see what I already told you. What COC would check, those things have to be in here. That from where you're going to get your money, do you have a financial backing or not? How are you going to treat the existing shareholders? What amount you will be paying to the employees? What amount you'll be paying for the governmental dues? What amount you'll be paying to the operational creditors? And finally, the most important questions, how much you'll be paying to the banks? Because those are the people who will be taking the decision. So that is all about it. And this is all very flowery language of regulation 37, but this is very plain and simple. What COC wants, you give them. That is what is required for a resolution plan to have in it itself. So how are you going to acquire the shares? How are you going to cancel the existing or delisting of the shares? And how you're going to modify the charges? And what is going to be the capital you're going to be infusing? Whatever documents of the constitutional documents, MOA, you'll be amending. And what will be the technology used? What are the portfolio of your goods and services? How you'll be approaching the governmental authorities for seeking the approvals. Right. Now the amount payable under a resolution plan to the operational creditor paid in priority over the financial creditors. So you have to take care of them. To the financial creditors who have the right to vote but did not vote in favor of the plan, they will be paid prior to the people who have been voted in favor. So this is just to make a balance that if you are not voting, then it should not be that you will be paid later. It's a vice versa thing, that if you are not voting, you'll be paid prior. Now you don't ask me that, sir, then why would someone vote if they are paid prior? So someone would vote because they are being paid an amount. Like for an example, I say I have 25% of voting share. If I say no, then there's a good likelihood that the whole resolution plan may not be approved, because for the approval 66% is required. So you cannot take it very easily. You'll have to go by how much is your percentage, how much he is ready to pay you as an individual, how much he's ready to pay the whole COC, and how financially strong his plan is looking, what are his other financials and vitals of the previous years. Everything has to be taken into consideration. That's what I've already told you, all the things, how he's going to deal with all the interest of all the stakeholders, and a statement giving details of the resolution applicant or any of his related parties have failed to implement. So he has to just show his bona fide. He also has to give an affidavit under 29A that is not a related party. So a resolution plan should provide the term of the plan and implementation schedule, the management and the control of the business of the CD during its term, and adequate means of supervising its implementation. So what usually happens, once a plan is given, it will have in itself one thing which COC would see and also NCLT would see. So once a plan is approved by NCLT, there is a committee which is formed, which is known as a monitoring committee, which usually has RP, usually has maybe one or two of the FCs, and one person from the resolution applicant. So this becomes a committee. So till that time, this whole thing shifts from CD to RP to RA. The committee takes care of whole thing. So a resolution plan should demonstrate that it addresses the cause of default, is feasible and viable, it has provisions of its effective implementation, it has provisions for approvals required and the timeline, and a resolution applicant has the capability of implementing such resolution plan. So approval of resolution plan. RP is to submit to the COC all the resolution plan which comply with the requirements of the code and its regulation, along with the details of the following transactions. So he has to say, yes, these are the resolution plan I have received. That's one aspect. And he has to give all the plans to the COC. Also, he has to give to COC one more thing. That are there any preferential transactions, undervalued transactions, extortionate transactions, or fraudulent transactions, which has been done by the corporate data. In some, there's a time limit of preceding 2 years. In some, it's very much open. So these transactions have to be avoided, because if a corporate data or the management have done something very bad in a company, or very foul in a company, I would say, then that amount has to be brought in by such corporate data. For this application can be filed by the RP with the approval of the COC. So now we know what all things have to be there in the resolution plan, the contents. Now how the submission happens. So a resolution applicant may submit a resolution plan to RP along with an affidavit, as I told you, under section 29A, that is, he is not a related party. Then IP shall examine each resolution plan received by him to confirm that each resolution plan provides for the payment of insolvency resolution costers, CIRP cost. So the whole cost, I think the question was asked earlier, the CIRP cost. So that has to be paid here by the resolution applicant. So as I told you, so this amount would have been gone to the COC members, but they have already incurred it, so they will recover it from the RA. But if this company goes into liquidation, then the sale of assets would happen, and this amount would be recovered by the FCs from there, right? So I think that simple no, I think in the comments box has to be yes now. So IP shall examine each resolution plan received by him to confirm that each resolution plan has so and so things. So I told you, first the CIRP cost, provides for the payment of debts of OCs, provides for the debts as per the waterfall mechanism under section 53, and provides for the payment of the FCs, provide for the payments of the FCs who have voted in favor, and the against ones would be given priority, provides for the management of the corporate debtor, implementation and supervision of the plan, does not contravene any of the provisions, conforms with other such regulations as given in regulation 37 and 38 of CIRP regulations. And the RP shall present to the COC for its approval such resolution plans which conform the above requirements. So COC may approve a plan by a vote of 66%. Resolution applicant may attend the meeting of COC in which his plan is considered. So there may be 5 resolution applicant and 5 would be considered in one meeting, or they would be considered in different meetings. They can present there, be present, and they can also present their plan and can solve the queries of the COC as well as RP. And then RP shall submit the resolution plan as approved by the CD to AA. Now COC to evaluate the resolution plan received strictly as per the evaluation matrix which they have identified earlier. COC is to record their deliberations on feasibility and viability of the plan, and RP is to endeavor to submit the resolution plan approved by the COC to the AA at least 15 days before the maximum period, be it 280 170 or 330 days. Maximum period of CIRP is there, right? So because what happens if the time period elapses or completes or gets concluded, the period of the company. So for NCLT to look into the plan and to pass an appropriate order, this provision is given that he has to file this plan in an application with an authority from COC at least prior 15 days of the completion of the CIRP period. RP is to then send a copy of the order to the AA approving or rejecting a resolution plan to the participants and resolution applicant, and a provision in the resolution plan which would otherwise require the consent of the members of the partners. So it's just in the case of stakeholders or JV agreements wherein you need the consent of the board of directors. But since here the board is not there, those consents are not required. And a person in charge of the management or the control of the business and operations of the corporate debtor after resolution plan is approved by the AA may make an application to AA for order seeking the assistance of local district administrator in implementing the terms of such resolution plan. So for an example, you say GST dues are to be waived off. That is what is given in the plan. NCLAT or NCLT, let's say, gives an order stating that may be given only after the approval of the competent authority. So then you'll have to file an application with this plan that we have given this plan to so and so company wherein we are seeking a waiver of the whole GST dues. NCLT has given this order. You may kindly consider. So these are all the things. So approval of the plan. So if the adjudicating authority is satisfied that the resolution plan is approved by the COC meets the requirements as per specified under section 30 subclause 2, it may pass an order approving the same. Now this will be binding on everyone. So even the state authorities, the banks, the government authorities, employees, the members, everyone, this is binding. Where A is satisfied the resolution plan does not conform to the requirements, they may reject the plan. So after the approval of the plan, moratorium would cease to have effect, which was given under section 14, and RP shall forward all the records of the CIRP to the IBBI for its records database. And the resolution applicant shall obtain the necessary approvals required under the law, as I told you, the GST approval example case. Also, if there is a case wherein a bigger fish is buying a smaller fish, then Competition Act would play its role, and approval under section 5 also has to be taken. And this has to be done prior to the approval of the plan by the COC. What happens when a non-approval or non-receipt of the resolution plan? Like if a plan is not received, obviously company goes into liquidation. If a plan is received but is not approved by the COC, then also it goes into liquidation. And when at any time, like for an example, COC and RP may feel that this is not a company which can ever be revived, they can always file an application before NCLT seeking liquidation. Right. Can you file an appeal? Yes, but how? Any appeal from an order approving the resolution plan shall be filed before NCLAT. When it can be filed? When the approved plan is in contravention of the provisions of any law. Now this is a question of fact. It is very difficult. So if there is a contravention stating that COC is paid more and operational creditors are not paid more, there are ample amount of judgment wherein this kind of disparities are not included in this subclause, that it is in contravention of the provisions of the law. There has been a material illegality in the exercise of the powers by RP. This is also a question of fact. The debt owed to OCs have not been provided. This is a question of fact. Insolvency resolution process costs have not been provided for repayment in priority. This usually does not happen because IRP and the COC members are first inclined towards getting back those amount of money which they have incurred. And the resolution plan does not comply with any other criteria. Yeah, I'm done with this part. Any question?
No further questions.
I think everyone is bored.
No, so they're not bored. Actually, your session is so insightful that their doubts are getting cleared by you already.
I mean, I'm not here for flowery appreciation, but if there is something, I would 100% want to address it, because now we are in the fag end of our session. So I would actually appreciate if they can start posting questions, so that once we have an interactive session, I may be able to answer a lot of questions. And now I'm making it open that it may not relate to these only aspects, because now we have time, we can take a lot of questions.
I request participants, if they have any query, they can write on the chat box, or they can unmute self and ask sir for any of their queries.
Yeah, you can do so. Let's go to the end part, waterfall mechanism. So this is literally the waterfall. So the bigger droplets are in the above part, and minute or nothing is there in the below part. So full CIRP cost and the liquidation costs are paid in the priority, then the workman dues, then the wages, then the financial debts, then the central government things. So if you see under SICA, the financial dues were in the later part and central government dues were on the upper part. So this is very good. Seeing that our money is invested with the banks, this is a very good thing. So this is the whole mechanism of 53. This is exactly given under 53. There's only one clause, but I thought that it should be like this so that you understand, because as and when it goes down, it will be paid less. I have, to be honest, in my practice, I have never seen anything being paid to preferential shareholders. Forget about equity. I have rarely come across something which is under the head of remaining dues and debts. And under central or state government dues, I have seen a lot of waivers. So if I don't want to name a company, but there was a due of 100 crores, a GST due, an amount of 1 crore is being paid. So even that is not considered. So you may see the CIRP cost 1, workman dues 2, wages 3, financial 4. That's it. These are the only people who are paid. The rest of the waterfall, it's all dry. So priority for distribution in case of liquidation. So it's the same, be it liquidation or CIRP. So Act also provides for the priorities waterfall, wherein the proceeds the same. So whatever was given in the structure of a waterfall or a diagram, now it's the same in the sense of a boring text. So CIRP costs are earlier, then debts owed to secured creditors are later, wages paid other than the workman, then the workman, then the financial dues, state government dues, any remaining preferential and equity. And my last part, so what has been the impact of IBC on debtors and creditors? So on debtors, so they maintain financial discipline and respect the timelines pertaining to the debt settlement. So now they are not so freely, easily, given a leeway. So we should not name it. This is a webinar, but we have seen a lot of cases. We read newspapers. They have taken the whole good company for a toss, and everything has gone haywire. So now they know that if they do so, they'll be thrown out. Now they avoid debt-based growth that might impact viability of business operations. They detest related party transactions for defrauding. They always keep their creditors informed about the company and their financial health, and they keep on doing so in a very timely fashion, and they embrace strict corporate governance principles. From the perspective of creditors, earlier they used to file a case, be there for 6 years, 8 years, nothing doing, they get nothing in the hand. Now, because it's time bound, now they know that if something goes bad, they can recover their money. Not only they can recover in time bound mechanism. Creditors in control approach allows them to inspect business operations of the corporate data through insolvency professionals. So now they have all the control. Now we see improved balance sheets with better recovery from the stress assets, better view over corporate data's business and practices, and the trust and debt recovery has been instilled now, and mainstreaming of the whole creditor market has been done. Lastly, before leaving, let us see one case that a suo motu cognizance was taken by Honorable NCL80 of the unprecedented situation of the COVID-19, and what Supreme Court has stated that to adhere to the prescribed timelines for taking the resolution process to its logical conclusion in order to obviate and mitigate such hardships, the NCL80 stated that this period of lockdown shall be excluded for the purpose of counting of the period of resolution process under section 12, that is the time period 180, 270, 330, that has been excluded, and any interim order or stay passed by the appellate tribunal shall continue till the next date of hearing. So this has been a good decision by Honorable NCL80, giving a lot of relief to a lot of corporate debtors, because I personally am doing maybe 2 to 3 cases. I'll just share my experience, which you may learn a lot. So there was a company, was a rich company, a drug company manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. Obviously, they are in demand. But the problem was the plant was idle since last 2 years. We got a resolution applicant. He filed a plan. Plan got approved in the month of December. He was supposed to pay something in the month of first tranche in the month of March. Now, the person, resolution applicant, is a person who deals in export-import. So his main revenue was from China. March, China obviously was badly affected due to COVID. Then we filed a case stating that he is not interested in let us liquidate. So he came up with revised timelines. We understood his problems. We agreed. Now tomorrow that case is listed for final orders, and we believe what will happen is NCLT would give him some relief so that he can pay, because over here under IBC one thing is of paramount. Liquidation is considered as a last resort. So if you are able to revive, you'll be able to revive the whole company, the whole area, governmental dues, financial dues, lot of employment you'll be able to save, and which is the idea. And these kind of cases or suo motu cognizance of Honorable NCL80 helps in doing such. I say thank you. Now let's say questions.
Yes, sir. There are 3 questions.
Yes.
First question is from Vibhushit. He's asking, what is meant by financial discipline?
Yeah. So financial discipline is you are not trying to default anyone. You are keeping your operations open. You are updating your banks about the day-to-day operations, your hardships. You are able to pay them timely. If you are unable to pay them, they will obviously empathize with you because of your constraints. You are not trying to defraud them. You are not undergoing or undertaking any of the related party transactions. And whatever risks you are taking all of them very calculated risks with very much prudence and business acumen. That is what I can say, what I meant about financial discipline.
Sir, next question is from Kunal Sharma. He's asking mainstream to credit market.
Yeah, so the credit market, like if a bank gives a credit or a loan to a borrower or a debtor, if he's able to pay on timely way or adhering to the timelines, bank in turn would be having a good balance sheet. That in turn would lead to bank giving out either more loans and give out more loans at a lesser rate of interest, or whenever the deposits are there, they'll be able to pay more. So if the whole thing goes in happy way, that if a loan is given, timely paid, next loan is given with less amount of interest, and deposit of a person with a bank, he gets more interest. So this is what I meant by mainstream to finance credit market.
So next question is from Nafisa. Her previous doubt is correlated with this one. The doubt is in section 31, it says AA can reject the plan if not satisfied. But the Sashidhar judgment says judicial decision is not binding. Aren't they contradictory?
No, Sashidhar judgment didn't say the decision of the judicial decision is not binding. Judiciary does not have any intervening powers. So that is what I'm trying to say. That section 31 is based only upon the question of facts. Those question of facts are not like you say that an operation, like for an example, I told you this 100 crore GST. Now that GST department goes to NCLAT stating that this plan was approved. I'm only getting 1 crore out of my 100 crore dues, but the banks are getting 60% or 50% of their dues. So that question has to be taken along with the facts and circumstances of that case. And over there, the judiciary should only confine themselves to that simple one question. So when I say a judicial intervention is curtailed, it is not very easy for any person to challenge a plan which is approved by the COC. And this Sashidhar judgment has been upheld in SR, all the later judgments of 2019. Sashidhar was the first one, so I have quoted. Then there have been some 6 to 7 cases, if I can remember. All of them have stated one thing. COC is paramount. COC's decision is paramount. Nothing beyond the commercial decision of the COC. Naman David, you're welcome. I'm glad that you liked the session. Yes.
Even sir, Kunal Sharma is appreciating.
Thank you so much. And any further doubts, we can, I think we can have it open for at least more 5-10 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. It's already 5, but we can have it for more 5 minutes. And if someone don't want to write, they want to come here, unmute themselves, show their video, they can ask. Someone want to ask here, I can take questions for more 5 minutes.
I request participants, if they have any other further queries from sir, they can either unmute themselves or write your questions in the chat box.
And you can ask if you have something.
Sir, my doubts are already cleared. I had one doubt and I already asked you.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
You're welcome, Nafisa. You're welcome, Gurpreet. No questions?
Yes, sir. No further questions from the participant.
You're welcome, guys. Amandeep, Vibhushit.
Sir, there is one question from Palak. She's asking, as a lawyer, at what stage would you advise your clients to declare bankruptcy? And if the company's board doesn't want to do so, then how would you convince them or provide them with alternatives?
Yeah, so as a lawyer, so you meant as a legal advisor of a firm who has not been dragged to NCLT yet, right? So I would convince them to go for the CIRP process only if I'm convinced myself, right? First. Now, how would I convince myself? If I see that there is no revival chance, or there is a management rift, or the bankers are themselves thinking of going to or dragging the company into the court, I would advise them to go for it. If I see that there is a revival chance, or if we are able to get some prospective investors, then I would not advise them to go for it.
Sir, there is another question from Nafisa. So what if the company goes bankrupt and it cannot repay the debts even if it goes into liquidation? Then what's the other remedy for creditors? Will they only be left with losses?
Yes. So if company goes bankrupt, if they're unable to pay the debts and it goes into liquidation, whatever proceeds of the liquidation the liquidator gets would be distributed amongst the creditors in their proportion of the debts, and they have to face the losses. That's the bitter truth.
Sir, we have no further queries.
I think then we may close.
Yes, sir. So I shall further proceed with the vote of thanks. I, Riddhi Jindal, on behalf of Law Internships, extend a hearty gratitude to Mr. Amir Bhavani, sir, who honored us with this enriching session and took out time of his busy schedule. I must also mention our deep appreciation to all the students who are present for today's session. Hope this session was a great learning experience for you all, and thank you again, one and all.
Thank you, Riddhi. Thank you, Law Internships. Thank you, all the participants. I hope you were not so bored with the so long PPT.
No, sir, your session was really interesting.
Thank you so much, and have a good time, guys. Take care.
Thank you, sir. You too.
Bye-bye.